Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Sheryl Daughety and Wendy Korbusieski, and we're looking at a passage from Luke chapter 14, verses 28 to 33. And verse 30 says, they would say there's a person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. So he's talking about this building where they hadn't calculated the cost and they only completed the foundation and they ran out of money. He says, or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he will send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the army is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own.
So in this passage, Jesus is talking about some, principles of discipleship, but this week we've been talking about growing in holiness and sanctification and whatnot. And so how are holiness and discipleship connected, do you think?
Holiness and discipleship are definitely very interconnected with each other. And Jesus portrays discipleship as something that aims at a goal to be achieved. It's not like a certification where once you're handed a certificate, you can say, now I'm a disciple. I'm done.
I'm a disciple graduate.
Yes. For example, in our focus passage today, Jesus compares discipleship to a building that needs to be finished, or a military endeavor that must be won. And similarly, holiness is something that requires our growth, progress, movement toward that specific goal. And we strive to become more and more like Jesus every day in that process of holiness. And growing in holiness is an aspect of being a disciple. A disciple is not only somebody who follows Jesus, but it's somebody who should move closer and closer to Jesus and become more and more like Jesus in that process.
Yeah, so in here, Jesus taught us to count the cost of, what it takes to be a disciple. Like, we have to be willing to give up everything to follow him. And I suppose there's also a cost to becoming holy, or becoming more holy, just like there is to becoming more like Jesus. It's going to cost us something.
Yeah, I think the struggle is true for all of us, right? To grow in holiness means there are certain actions you got to give up, attitudes, patterns of thinking, ways of living, and they're easier to hold on to than other things, right? So Jesus describes this cost of discipleship as a man who starts building. Like, it's important to know you have enough money to finish the building. And over my life, I've seen buildings that were started and only the foundation maybe got completed for one reason or another. And I've seen Christians the same way, right? They start out great, like, this is, I want to build a new house, but they never seem to move past that basics, right? And our growth in holiness is similar, right? Sometimes we lay some things down easily, behaviors, attitudes, but then there are some other things that cost us more, and we're just unwilling to do it. Yeah. And then Jesus also described it like a military campaign. A king has to evaluate the size of his army and the size of the army he's going against, and decide whether it's a fight he wants to have. And if his army and the resources are outnumbered, the only solution, right, is to negotiate a surrender, to say, hey, I can't win this battle. And being a disciple of Jesus and growing in holiness has a very similar concept, right? Once you become a disciple of Jesus, the calling in your heart is to be more like Jesus. And you, because it's a vast army that's impossible to defeat, right? And it's not because Jesus is militant, it's because your desire to be like Jesus should anyway become so strong that your only viable option is to surrender. This is I want to do what he wants me to do. And if we're going to be disciples of Jesus, it's going to require that we grow in holiness, right? We have to finish the building. We have to negotiate a surrender to the King of Holiness and his vast army. So do you think your calling to be a disciple of Jesus is like an unfinished building? And if so, how?
For me, absolutely. I mean, there's constantly projects under construction, and then there's things that I thought, this is only going to take, a rehab, and then you take off a shingle, and man, it's a whole gut job. It's like Nope, we got to take it down to the studs and start over again. So there's constantly things being revealed and built back up and torn down to nothing and recreated. So absolutely a project under construction.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think when you feel like surely everything has been changed, or it's like why my husband doesn't like to do jobs in people's houses because they can't make up their minds about what they want done, and so something's constantly being chinged
I
or
gotta tell you something.
taken out.
I haven't seen fire in his eyes very many times. But one night in an elders meeting, I don't even remember how it would have gotten in the conversation. But somebody said the phrase, since you're here.
Oh.
And
it had to do with construction stuff.
Yeah. Oh man, you could see just his whole. He said, "Since you're here, it's cost me more money because everybody thinks since you're there, you're going to do it for free." And he says, "No,
yes.
It's still got me anyway." He was pounding the table about it. It was funny.
I can understand.
Since you're here,
I've watched him live through those since you're here. Yeah, and I also think that because we are constantly in that process of changing, that we should feel like it's a project that's never done. I don't really think it ever will be.
Yeah, well, we all three own a house. Houses are never-ending projects. There is always. I live with somebody who loves. She's listening. I don't care. She loves a new project, right? It always something. I'm like, this needs to end, right? At some point, it needs to come to a close. But if you live in it over time, you're going to need another roof. You're going to need new carpet, new floors, new paint, because it's just. There are certain things that get worn down. It's much like washing feet in the Bible. They walked in dirt, and so they washed their feet because they had gotten dirty. It wasn't because they hadn't taken a bath, but their feet had gotten dirty.
Right.
Same is true as a disciple. There are things that become in disrepair over time that we may have even conquered before, right? That we have to go back and, I need to shore this up because my attitude's getting out of whack. My thought life's getting out of whack. My, whatever.
Attitude adjustments.
Yeah. And just different things over time that you forget about or you don't pay attention to. And I think it is a lot like a house, and you constantly, it's not even adding on to it, even though I think there's some of that, but you're constantly sprucing up and changing and fixing and refining, all of those things. So how do you see your calling to be wholly similar to facing a vast army that you can't defeat?
The only way is surrender. Because when you're facing all of that on your own, you know that there is no way that you're going to win. There's no way you can fight it. There's no way that you're going to fight that alone. And so I think I do have to surrender that to him fully, because he is the only one that can do that work. And I can't will myself to try harder to make those changes. I can decide that I'm going to be more dedicated to seeing those things through, but I can't do all that by myself, and I won't.
Not this past Wednesday night, but the Wednesday before, Ron Miller was teaching, and we had tripped on this conversation about, how do we know we're following God's will, and I want to make sure I'm doing it right, and and it was just this conversation of surrender, and it was like, my response was that this was the experience that I had found in my life, is because I know it's my nature to want to hold on and do it and do it and do it myself, And it was like trying to hold on to sand, and the tighter you grip it, the more it's going to push through your fingers and get away from you. And the only way to sustain it and hold a full hand was to open it up. And in that surrender is where you found the satisfaction. In that surrender, in that open hand, you can find it being filled. And so I think that's how you have to live that way is that in that surrender.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
I see this two ways. I only included it in one way in the notes. But I see it two ways. One, I think you have to surrender to God because you can't. In the end, He's going to, overwhelm you.
Yeah.
But the same is true of the unholiness in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not smart enough to manage it
Mm-hmm.
or to deal with it. And it's like an army.
Mm-hmm.
And it will overwhelm you if you don't deal with it. And I think it works both ways. The easier way is, are you going to surrender to the one who wants your best interest? Or are you going to surrender to the one who wants your,
Right.
demise? And I think that is your choice, which one you're going to surrender to. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us on Monday as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.